welcome to our webinar. This is the first of a series of 3 webinars that we're running over the next couple of months. Myself and Matthijs have been working for some time on this responsible management project. And it's part of the business school strategy as well to move towards exploring what responsibility is and what responsible management is. So really pleased you've been able to join us today. We're going to have a chat through a number of the ideas that we've been developing. And as we say there, this first exploration is to look at why has CSR failed and what can we do about it? What can we take it forward? And we've got sort of 2 parts to the presentation. First part that Matthijs is going to talk about CSR and try and understand why it's failed. And then we're going to look about where do we go next? What can we do? And that will probably be about 20-25 minutes for us chatting, and then with plenty of time for us to then come back and have a discussion and raise any questions and comments. So there'll be quite a lot of time after we've chatted for some comments. So feel free to start putting those in the chat and we'll pick those up. And I hope you can join us in this subsequent series. We've got a couple more that we're doing over the next few months. So I'm Andy Brookes, teaching the business school, very much focused and interested in this responsible management project, very much involved with our teaching now and our research, and working with my colleague Matthijs, who's from his job title there, you can see his primary focus is also about responsible management. So I'll hand over to Matthijs to start the presentation.
Thank you, Andy, and welcome everybody. So what we are going to do in this hour is basically give a little taster of what the MSBA could look like, and of course this will be only 1 hour. But the MSBA, and at the end of this hour we talk a little bit more about the actual program that we are launching in September. The program is an MSBA, so it's an MBA with an S for sustainability. So it's an entirely sustainable MBA from scratch on, designed towards sustainability. And so the question, of course, and that is why we are organizing this webinar today as well, is why do we need to be focusing on sustainability? And in particular today we talk a little bit about the CSR, so corporate social responsibility. And this is something that is an enormously important topic in our business school that we are collectively researching and discussing. And the basic questions the basic question underneath this all is basically, can corporations be responsible? Now, just to go a little bit back in time, there's quite a long history of this very question. So a famous scholar, Banerjee, already pointed to this question being raised in the 1840s. So the question of whether and what the moral responsibility is of organizations. So basically we are stepping into a discussion and a question that has been raised over the last hundreds of years. And in particularly the 1987 Brundtland report from the United Nations is interesting to have a little bit of a look at, because that report raised awareness and raised the important issue of climate change and the role of organizations and corporations in it. And they pointed to the inherent connectedness of our global problems. So when we talk about climate change, when we talk about poverty, when we talk about inequalities, when we talk about racism, they're all interconnected. And as a business school in teaching our students, in offering our programs to people in organizations. We want to learn from this. And so the first is then, why did CSR, so corporate social responsibility, or a bit of a newer term, why did sustainability actually fail? So first, if we observe what is currently happening in society, is that despite the awareness being raised, and not just in the last 30 years or so since the Brundtland report, but basically since the last 150 years, since this question is raised, what we can observe is that all the attention for corporate social responsibility, or the moral responsibility of organizations, or the integration of sustainability in organizational functioning, has not lived up to the promise. And it hasn't achieved that organizations have solved the world's most pressing social and environmental problems. And if we look at the big corporations, the big multinationals in our contemporary society, what we can observe is that they are still contributing to not to the solution of our global problems, but actually are amplifying our global problems. So big tech is still contributing to the spreading of misinformation. Big pharma is contributing and profiting on the global health crisis. Big sugar is contributing to that, and so on. So, why did then CSR actually fail, and what can we do about it? Now, I will present you 5 explanations of why CSR has failed in the last years. So, as I said, the Brundtland report pointed towards the inherent interconnectedness of our global challenges, and that we as governments, as citizens, and certainly as organizations, we need to look at all of these global problems in their interconnectedness. But what you actually see is that, and that is the question, whether organizations actually perceive their own social responsibility, and whether they are aware, and whether they're really doing something with their social responsibility. So for a large part, social responsibility is often just mere window dressing. One interesting example as a cycling fan is that in the Tour de France of 2018, you had the big star Chris Froome, and his cycling team was that he was riding for at that time was Sky. And during the Tour de France, they had shirts with ocean rescue on it. You can see the picture there. And it was a campaign against plastics in the ocean. And so they were showing that the cycling team was showing that they were very much involved with the problem of plastics in the ocean, which of course is a major problem, and we really need to be doing something about it. But it's quite ironic, of course, that, so this was in 2018, that in 2019, Ineos took over as the sponsor of this team. And Ineos is of course one of the biggest petrochemical companies in the UK, so a producer of plastics. And of course, this whole ocean rescue campaign that was on the shirts of the cyclists immediately disappeared, because it would be, of course, a bit too ironic, perhaps, to see. So the question here that we are raising is, okay, to what extent is all of the social responsibility that organizations are doing genuine, or is it mere window dressing? And then the literature and the attention for a CSR also involves the role of corporate, of course. So what does the corporate then actually stand for? And is there a possibility that organizations actually feel a corporate responsibility to do well and to do good? And what we actually found, and this is something that we find over and over again in the literature, in studies that have been conducted, is that CSR is interesting for an organization as long as it is profitable. So there needs to be a business case for CSR, for sustainability. And you can see that, for instance, in the discussions around the green economy. So then when you hear stories or read stories where there is, when solar panels and the wind turbines, when it becomes just an economic industry, so that there is a belief in that we can actually transform to a greener economy, save the world, and at the same time just we can retain our economic system, because doing well can also mean we can do well financially by doing good for the environment. But the problem actually is that it's much more nuanced than this. So there is an interesting case where Shell last year already announced that they might fail to reach their own green energy targets, and Shell had quite modest targets to invest in green energy compared to their continued investment in fossil fuels. But this year, earlier this year, it came out that Shell hadn't even met their own targets for green investments last year. And why was that? Well, they admitted themselves that investments in green energy was just not profitable enough. So they couldn't live up to the business case. So they admitted that they were not investing enough in green energy because it was not profitable. And this is, of course, what we are dealing with. And if we think of the current pandemic, so many organizations are currently stuck in the survival modes that that any commitments to the bigger issues, climate change, poverty, and so on, are perhaps even forgotten. So number 3 then. This is more about what we actually mean with CSR and sustainability. So the academics, but also of course in the real world, there has been a long discussion for decades now that goes on and on about what is actually meant with corporate social responsibility. What is the responsibility, and what towards whom do organizations have a responsibility? So there is little agreement on what CSR actually means, what it is. And we can also ask ourselves whether it's this lack of understanding, whether it is benefiting some invested parties. So for instance, organizations may be quite happy with the status quo and the lack of a shared understanding of what sustainability and CSR actually mean. So in the same time, when sustainability and CSR can function as such empty concepts, which we do not have a shared understanding of what it really means. It can also act and function as a fantasy. So, for instance, we hear stories about Shell investing or at least proclaiming their investment in green energy. We can maintain a fantasy for ourselves that Shell is actually engaging in the transformation towards a green economy, and that they are truly investing in green energy. So what we see here is that these terms actually function as a fantasy. And in reality, what we see actually is that their continued investment in fossil fuels is in no way comparable to the little investment that they make in green energy. So And then if we look at what happens in organizations often towards social responsibility is often a very legal approach to it. So what company basically do is ask themselves, okay, whether they by law they need to be doing something around sustainability or social responsibility. And so the law becomes dictating the constraints and boundaries in which organizations have to function. And what we actually see is that responsibility and the global challenges that we are currently facing, like climate change, that they do not really sit well with the law. So in this way, CSR becomes kind of depoliticized into a legal issue of compliance. So organizations, they tell the public that they are compliant with the law, that they are just doing what the law tells them to do, but the law is ineffective to ensure that we are actually effectively tackling climate change and poverty and inequalities and so on and so on. So we need to be stepping much more beyond that, but still what we observe is that organizations maintain to this logic of a legal approach towards what their responsibility is. And then finally, what we then, and I've mentioned this briefly as well before, is that in organizations and in organizational life, and often as well in the academic literature, is that what we see is that CSR is approached as something that we have to justify economically. So CSR is either a means to improve organizational performance. So when CSR activities contribute to the performance and the profitability of a company. But companies often also use CSR as pure greenwashing, because reputation is also, of course, also very important for organizations. So there is a cynical approach towards CSR as a PR tool. And sustainability and corporate social responsibility remain thereby approached as something that needs a business case, that needs to be integrated into our economic state of running our economy and the role organizations play in our economy. So we have a business case. We need a business case for ecology rather than an ecological base for business, actually. So what we are observing is the absurdity of contemporary economics and the economic system, which trumps everything else. And even when we are faced with a pandemic, when we are faced with the consequences of climate change, the logic of the market is still dominating in how we approach CSR. And this is the state of affairs. Thank you. And now Andy will take over from here.
Thanks, Matthijs. Well, I think Matthijs has laid out quite a strong case there about CSR and its inadequacies. But what do we put in place? In some ways, there's been a building critique of CSR, but we also need to think, well, what do we do differently? What do we put in place? And it's become an urgent issue. It's because the language of crisis is being used now. People like Greta Thunberg, David Attenborough have certainly raised the profile, raised public awareness and the consensus, but there still remains a consensus about the lack of consensus over what we need to do. But this has started to move into the business sector as well. And voices from business are starting to add to the voices of these other, the environmental campaigns as well. And Mark Carney is an example, a very mainstream economist, until recently the governor of the Bank of England. He's making a very strong case that society at the moment has placed much more importance on financial values than on human values. And he argues that that's at the root of the crises that we currently face about the climate, about health, that it's actually we've made a shift in society far too much towards this market thinking. And the Financial Times, again, not the most radical publication, has in some ways called for a reset of capitalism, a rethink. It's not that change isn't happening. We sold 3 million electric cars last year, which was a 40% increase. So we are taking action. It's just simply not fast enough or deep enough. Air pollution, despite those electric cars, air pollution in cities now kills more people than does smoking. So we've still got a huge challenge. We may have removed some plastic bags from supermarkets, but we're still putting 8 million metric tons of plastic into the ocean every year to add to the 150 million that's already there. And Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the UN, is one of the most powerful voices to say, look, we're not on track at the moment. We're going to fail to meet a lot of these goals unless we do something much more wide scale and much faster to meet some of these challenges. So this rethinking, what do we need post CSR? What we're going to replace it with, or what new thinking do we need? And one of the most influential thinkers across the last 25 years in terms of CSR has been John Elkington, who came up with the idea of the triple bottom line of profit, people and planet. But even Elkington now, in recent years, has said, well, I think that idea has had its time. I want to recall it, and we need to rethink it, because I think his idea to equate people, planet and profit together is quite dangerous, that the people and the planet need to come first and the profit afterwards. So we're taking up in some ways Elkington's challenge to rethink responsibility and try and reclaim some of the power of responsibility as a word, as a notion. Much more about thinking about moral accountability, thinking about the causes of issues as well. Who was responsible? People taking responsibility. And what are we charged with? What are we responsible for? And the parental metaphor is a very strong case of how we often take responsibility, but in a business sense, do we take that parental care for the world around us and our staff? So I'm going to build up 3 ideas really to redefine responsible management. One of them is care, one of them is duty, and one of them is fulfillment. And let's look at those 3 words really. Familiar words, but a rethinking and a reshaping. So what does it mean to care? A responsible manager must care if it's going to be true, if they're going to be truly responsible. And that's about feeling a concern and a wider interest for what's around us, and being able to provide or look after. So this concern and looking after is absolutely key for what care means. But what do we care about? How caring are we at the moment? Well, the evidence is that we're not really caring for the world around us, or even society particularly well. The evidence is that the way we run our organisations, our economy, isn't looking after the economy or the ecology very well. I think a recent study said 100% of sea turtles have got plastic in their bellies. And if we look at the way we treat people, the Grenfell Tower tragedy revealed actually a much more of a focus on the cladding company who cladded Grenfell Tower, much more focus on profitability rather than the care of the people in the tower. And for the local authority, probably much more of a focus on cost efficiency and the value of property. So we're simply not caring enough, and it leads to these catastrophic damages. There's also a link between carelessness and responsibility as well, that ignorance in some ways leads to carelessness. We need to know in order to care. And the recent Windrush investigation into the deportation of people who had lived in the UK for 50 years, actually the recent review suggested that part of the root cause was ignorance in the Home Office. Just a lack of understanding of the complexities of immigration. And it led to careless and uncaring practices that led to some tragic consequences again. So part of being a responsible manager really is knowing. A responsible manager can't really say I didn't know. It's part of the responsibility to know, to be well informed, to take action to know, and know more widely what responsibility means for our own organisation. So first part is caring and knowing. The second bit is duty. And again, it's a common word, but it's this idea of an obligation, what we ought to do. And interestingly, Oxford Dictionary covers the moral and legal, going back to Matthijs' point earlier on. What ought we do from a moral perspective in the right thing, and what we have to do from a legal perspective? And they're both important. And again, these aren't new terms, but perhaps we need to rethink them. We're familiar with the concept of duty of care. It's part of our common law as employers to look after our employees and safeguard their duty of care. But we tend to limit that to thinking about physical well-being and preventing accidents at work. But I think responsible management really is an extension or an expansion of our familiar term of duty of care. So very much a legal and an ethical duty is responsible management. It's also about an external look beyond just simply our employees or our internal organisation. It's a duty of care to the world beyond our organisation, to society and the environment. And really that's going to involve putting on a bigger pair of spectacles and looking at the world, not just through that narrow lens of what's best for business, but looking at that bigger lens, putting on a bigger pair of glasses and thinking what's best for humans in ecology. And I think some of the issues that we've had are where we've separated society and business as if they're two separate domains. And we need to bring them back together. And a responsible manager is somebody that sees those two things connected together. We can see clearly the impact of the industrial age over the last nearly 200 years has clearly impacted on the amount of carbon in the environment. And whereas we look historically at wealthy people from the past like Rockefeller, who managed to accumulate great wealth and was a great philanthropist and very pious person in his private life, yet he separated that from the damage he often did in his to generate his wealth. That seems historic, but how much is that still the case today? How much are we still separating business and economic activity from society? We need to bring the two together. And this duty as well isn't just about the future, isn't just about zero carbon in 2050. It's dealing with the problems that we have now as well, about current unsustainability and current irresponsibility. We've got a huge epidemic in some ways of mental ill health caused by workplace stress. So there's clear evidence now of unsustainable management practice where we're simply burning out employees. That is unsustainability now, and responsible management is about dealing with that now. So that's the duty, really taking hold of it, feeling responsible for it. And the third bit is fulfilling. Again, quite an old word, but more powerful than action, I think. There's plenty of action around sustainability and CSR, but fulfillment is about purposeful action. It's about action that makes a difference. It fully executes and completes. So I think responsible management is much more about this fulfilling, doing things that make a difference, and really getting away from this idea of, which Matthijs spoke about earlier, lots of talk, but very little action that makes a difference. So this idea of greenwash, where CSR is more about PR, we need to move beyond that. That isn't genuinely responsible management. This will involve a lot of reflection. It's not easy to do. We need to really think deeply about our organisations and our careers, and really reflect deeply about the purpose of our organisation. Is this the right business to be in? Can it ever be sustainable? Is it creating too much harm? Is this the right profession to be in? Or is this the right sector to be in? What is our strategy responsible? Are we just focused on profits and growth, or do we need to do more? And also, finally, we need to be responsible management isn't naive. It actually understands the challenges and the barriers to actually achieve these changes are difficult, they're complex. We look back historically, how long it took to overcome slavery, how long it took to get the vote for women. It took so long. So these changes are difficult, and there are lots of powerful voices and powerful interests that want to retain the status quo, because lots of us benefit from the status quo. So we're not suggesting anything naive. We're saying we need to be realistic and really face and build a meaningful action that overcomes those challenges. So in summary, really putting forward this broader redefinition based on these three concepts of care, duty, and fulfillment. And thanks for listening to us there. We're more or less halfway through, and we want to really give time now for a bit of discussion and comment. We'll stop sharing my screen for now.
Thank you, Andy. So any comments or reactions from the audience? Feel free to switch on your camera and speak, or...
We've got a hand up from Sarah. Sarah King.
Yeah, hello. I'd
Hello,
love to share my thought. Thank you so much for speaking on this, both of you. It was really informative, and I just really like the point on how one of the biggest failure reasonings is us just having too much emphasis on the economics and not on environmental impacts, because a lot of other keynotes on CSR I've attended, they've just been explaining that translating and getting people on board is the most important part, and the way they've been able to do it is giving them economic reasonings and how they will see longer term profits in the end. So that point just really resonated with me.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for this comment. And I fully agree with your observation that often when you hear others speak, and this is also a very dominant, has been a very dominant idea in the CSR approach and thinking, is that, okay, we have to make it attractive for organizations to engage in CSR practices and in sustainability, and we can make it attractive for organizations by showing that it really pays off, that it has an economic benefit, that they can be profitable, and that, like with the example I gave, you can become a very profitable organization by investing now in wind turbines or solar panels, and of course that's fine enough as long as it truly contributes to the environmental goals. But what we observe, and what I think is often hidden, is this other side, and this other side. So there was the Guardian report, wasn't it, Andy? Recently, I had it in my notes, in my slides, and of course we can share the slides with you all if you want after this webinar. But so that there's still 8.7 million people die each year because of carbon pollution, basically. And so on the one hand, we can start to think of, okay, how can organizations become more sustainable and so on. But on the other hand, we also have to observe what is currently still happening, and how our organizations how are they keep on contributing to this. And of course, it is a global problem. But I think we are now at a point in time where we also have to face these type of questions, particularly around climate change, where so many countries across the world are already suffering, and they are already paying the price of climate change because of either drought or rising sea levels. And it is often the poorer countries that are affected most strongly. So, for instance, a colleague of mine living in Pakistan, where they are dealing with drier and drier seasons each year. So the desertification of Pakistan. And if you look at the politics in Pakistan, climate change is not on the agenda. It's only it retains it remains an economic affair. In that sense, the elections and the politics. And so this is what we are observing in countries worldwide. And so even in a situation like in Pakistan that is really struggling with the effects of climate change and the droughts there, they of course, and there's of course good explanations for it. They are still suffering from, or they are still focusing on the economic way out. And this, I think, is for us the challenge to be able, as a society, as a global society, as a national society, as a business school, to make these concerns really primary. So the concerns for climate change and so on. Yeah.
I think just adding that to the point that Sarah made as well, that in some ways there's a breaking the myth, I think, which Matthijs spoke about. It's almost a myth that CSR is some sort of simple business payoff. And actually, it's much responsible management really is about facing the dilemma and difficult choices, really. That responsible management is about what works for the organisation and what works for society, and trying to get that. The responsibility is about the balance between the two, which might mean some costs, some lower dividends. But that is truly responsible management, dealing with that dilemma. Rather than a myth that it's almost a no-cost solution. So yeah, I think there's dilemmas and difficult choices, but that's why an explanation of why we are where we are at the moment. Great, thanks for that, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you for those responses. If it's okay, could I ask a follow-up question to the comments you've made? Thanks. So I did join the presentation a bit late, so you may have mentioned this beforehand, but from what I'm understanding is that a big responsibility is in the manager's hands. And obviously this is, like you said, everyone's problem in a regional, global, local, and individual level. So everyone has a responsibility to take the responsibility, I guess. But for a lot of managers and employees who have been kind of locked in the box of profit-making companies, how do you shift their gaze towards this issue and educate them on this and persuade them to really pursue responsible management?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I suppose as educators, part of the answer, I think, is about knowledge. I think that goes back to that care, I think. How do we start caring and really feeling responsible unless we know and understand the links between what we do? And in some ways, I would think it is about decisions and how we make decisions and use the power and authority that we've got. And that can happen at lots of different levels in an organisation. At any level, people have some choices about the way they manage people, the way they treat each other around them. So I think these choices, these difficult choices, are made at all levels in a way. And it takes some courage sometimes to make a decision that's a sustainable, responsible decision. But that perhaps is the way to build a culture in an organisation. The more people that are prepared to take those decisions, the more likely that will change the overall culture of an organisation. So not very clear-cut answers there, but nice.
And in addition to what you're saying, and part of the philosophy of the MSBA program as well, of course, it lies in the in three strategies that we have identified in order to achieve this. And these are very broad strategies, but nonetheless important. So the first point is problematizing, and that is we need to raise awareness in the public, in ourselves, in organizations about what the current practices and how they are affecting ourselves, the planet, others, and so on. So we first need to expose, so to say, the problematic nature of contemporary practices. Next step is to resist to that. So we also need to be starting to think about, okay, what actually what actually do we not want to do anymore? And here, of course, it becomes a little bit more difficult because people have to make the choice, ultimately, individuals have to make the choice between, okay, do I work for this organization that is contributing to carbon emissions and so on, or do I have another choice? And so many people, of course, these days are forced into taking employment, notwithstanding the potential destruction of the planet that is taking place as a result of the company's activities. And this, of course, is something that we need to build towards. So a more active group of resisting individuals and groups of people. And then in the next step there is imagination. And this is one of the key elements of our program, but also in terms of thinking around, okay, how to move on from here. And that is, we need to have imagination, and imagination particularly to create imaginaries. So ideas of, okay, how would the economy then function in a more sustainable way? So how could organizations function in a more sustainable way so that they protect and promote the dignity of people, the planet, animals, and so on and so on. And that is a process that we have to start collectively with individuals, with organizations, with managers, but also employees, notwithstanding what level they are working in, but also, of course, students in our university. We need to start thinking much more in terms of, okay, how can we build organizations that are much more truly sustainable? And that is the process also. That's not something that you can answer within an hour, of course. It's a long-term process. That's why we have the program. That is why that we start these initiatives. But so that is also one way in which we can start to talk about in response to your question. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah. I think what the things we've been talking about today are part of a broader project, really, in the business school about responsible management. And although we're talking about what businesses might do, we're on exactly the same journey in the business school about what does it mean to be a responsible business school. So we're asking all these questions. And in some ways, what we've chatted about today is the sort of journey we're on as a business school as well. So as part of this broader project, we're looking at exploring issues of responsible management, and we're very keen for people to be involved in that. So we're welcome. We'll chat later how you might be able to become more involved in that. But also part of that is this new program that we're really launching from this September, which picks up a number of really based on the philosophy that Matthijs just spoke about in terms of this problematizing and then imagining something different. We are very much locked as a society in the way things are. And really, we want to have more conversations like we're having today. And the program offers a more longer term form for us to do that and work as a collaborative group over a couple of years to build those ideas. Should I just say a bit more about the program now, Matthijs?
Yeah, sure.
So we're just about to validate the program actually early next month. So it's just to give you an idea of the program, of the work we're doing, and we'll talk a bit more about some of the other broader projects. And really, everything we've spoken about today, the program is to try and turn those ideas into a program of learning. So people that really want to get involved in that, it's still an MBA qualification, but we've inserted the word sustainable in there quite deliberately to say, well, what does it mean to manage sustainably? If we're going to deal with these clearly crises in the world, we need to do something differently. Not just, as we've done today, not just a critique, but also saying, what can we do differently? What does this mean for the day-to-day practice of managers? Because partly it's about knowledge, not understanding, but it's about a lack of knowledge of what can we do. And that's what we're exploring as a business school. What does it mean for our teaching? What does it mean the way we design programs? So we're trying to work through these same challenges as any other organisation would do. That's rather small, but it gives you an idea of the program's very much based around the sort of themes that Matthijs was talking about, trying to understand problems and understand the conditions and the way we run society now. And then in phase 2 of the program, it's much more about imagining what we could do differently, imagining new forms of organisation, imagine a new form of the HR profession or the accountancy profession. So what does it mean for professions? And then the final part is about actually trying to then make a difference, to transform organisations, ourselves, and then ultimately make a difference in society. So this is quite a different program, very pragmatic, very much about trying to deal with the real issues that we face in the world now. And we think there's some benefits. Hopefully it's a positive experience, but also an opportunity. And we know there's a yearning out there for people to make a contribution to the work, to good, social good, as well as having successful, rewarding careers. And we think for organisations that sponsor people, there'll be lots of benefits in terms of skills in the organisation, as well as demonstrating a commitment to sustainability as well. So that's a little bit of a flyer really for what we're planning to do next, and very soon we'll be providing more information on that. Sally, hi. You just want to unmute yourself, Sally. Still muted, Sally.
Oh, sorry about that. It was right. I was trying to find the button. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about something that I'm a little bit familiar with, working in a social enterprise. We're a community benefit society. So obviously supporting the community is really important to us. When we became a community benefit society, we got involved in understanding around social return on investment. And at the time, this is about probably about 6 years ago, what they were trying to do is, obviously every company has to have a balance sheet, and you've got obviously financial accounting that has to be done. What they did was created a separate balance sheet, which actually provided you with information on how that organisation had actually what their social return on investment was. And I think that is quite an interesting topic. One of the most difficult thing is measurement of it, because obviously, as you were talking earlier, you've got to determine what actually you're measuring. And you've talked quite a lot about international and global, but on that smaller level, there are a lot of smaller organisations, and if we all work together, then we can create. It's possible to create that support that wave moving forwards.
No, that's really what you've just encapsulated there, Sally, is what we almost the philosophy of what we're trying to do on the programme as well. Almost there are we know there are alternatives and more sustainable alternatives like you've described. So part of it's making people more aware of those. And this idea of a social movement as much as a top-down change, from the global government, which doesn't really exist. But this idea of a social movement through lots of organisations building up, having a greater imagination and building up these alternatives, and in influencing the professions as well, is absolutely just aligns totally with the sort of thing we envisage on this programme. So that's great, Sally. I'd like to learn more about what you've done there. You could share that with us at some point.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting. It reminded me, my wife works for a charity in 2014, 15 it was, and working on this precisely to for that charity to develop a way of measuring social return on investment. But then the irony was that at some point she was laid off because there was no funding anymore to do this. But
yeah,
no, this is a very this is, and certainly for organizations and existing organizations, these kind of initiatives are very important as a way of bridging the gap, so to say, between what organizations currently doing and towards more truly sustainable organizations. Yeah, and for instance, we have an economist on in the business school who has developed an accounting methods for community-owned wind turbines, and basically incorporating into the accounting methods the benefits for the community of a community-owned wind turbine. So where the benefits are not going to some kind of organization, but directly going to the community and the shareholders, which are the community, the people living in the community. And so these also provide much more tangible examples of how to actually do this in practice. So yeah, very interesting. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks.
I think we're very quickly running out of time. I think now has gone very quickly. So really thank you for your taking time to listen to some of our ideas and engage with us with those questions and input as well, which has been fantastic. We're hoping to run these at least for the next 2 months, but perhaps more regularly on a monthly basis. And we're picking up a similar theme, but next month we're going to be looking about through the lens of the current situation, really, and what COVID means and how it's revealed unsustainability in the current ways we do things. And then perhaps the third one is about what we've just been talking about with Sally in some ways, imagining what some of these sustainable workplaces might look like. How can we start to imagine those? So we're really pleased if you could join the others and share those with other people. We're really happy to join, if you could join us again for those. And I'm not sure, our emails on the slides? Yeah. Our emails are on the slides there. So we're really keen if you want to be more involved in this broader project, where we do take these things further and have further discussions. We're really keen to have practitioners and people from all sectors involved in this project that enrich our project, not simply to have academics, but have a broader range of people. And build this coalition or this movement. So thanks very much for being here. Thank you for listening. We will send the slides out. Matthijs, I'll just final comment from yourself.
Thank you for being here, and yeah, we hope to see you next month and the coming month.
Yeah. Great. Thanks very much, Matthijs, putting you on the spot there. Thanks very much, everybody, and look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.